My name is Paul Smith from the School Governance Network, and again, I'm joined by Michael Iannini, who's on outdoor assignment this month, because today we want to talk about the recent climate strikes by school kids all over the world, and how that might be interacting with governance issues. Now, obviously, just to give you a bit of a background, a while ago, a young Swedish political activist called Greta Thunberg did a fantastic speech, did some amazing things to actually bring climate change, their climate change to the world and the attention of a much wider audience. And she basically said it's about time that kids stood up and said no more, and looking towards our politicians, our business leaders, and a movement has followed her. Which has culminated in, these strikes with kids taking time off school and protesting, creating banners, having their parents involved, teachers. And it's wonderful to see kids standing up and saying, you know what, this is our future. It's about time that we took charge and try to do something about it. And again, like a lot of people, just becoming keyboard warriors and doing something online only gets you so far, whereas actually taking to the streets and pushing politicians to change their policies is great. So that's what's been happening. And again, it hasn't impacted all schools, but there has been, thousands of schools impacted by this, of people taking time off. However, how does this actually play out in the governance world? And I think there's a couple of angles here that we want to explore in this newscast. One is a policy side of things, in terms of, I'm sure there's been plenty of parents going, will our kids be punished for this? Is this something that schools are actively encouraging or discouraging? How do we actually engage students in this sort of discourse and this conversation? And then another angle is actually the education and the preparedness of kids to take on these sort of problems, but also these conversations. So, Michael, do you want to talk about sort of how you see this might play out in the education space?
Yeah, I mean, quite simply, here I am in Hong Kong. I'm in this area called Wafu, just next to Cyberport, in this little cove. And this cove's not really too different from any other cove in Hong Kong. A lot of schools will engage in various activities throughout the year that are related to the environment, such as beach cleanups. I mean, this beach is in dire need of being cleaned up. I don't think it's gotten any attention. Normally, the beaches that people pay attention to tend to be a bit more high profile, where there'll be more expat families, living nearby, or that are much more in their sort of realm of influence. Whereas beaches like this just clutter, endlessly. And so, in one respect of the education, you'll have these extracurricular activities or co-curricular activities, experiential learning, where it's intended to get students out. And, in some respect, it's not about activism. Schools might take a chance to educate students based on the fact that let's go out and let's join a beach cleanup world organization. Let's collect bags of trash. And what we can do is not only are we cleaning up, but we're also going to use this as an opportunity. We're gonna collect, organize, sort. We're gonna create this data that will get fed back into this global database, so that we can look at what's the impact of trash littering our beaches globally. And I've worked with schools on doing that. I've done, underwater beach cleanups where we've done scuba diving with students, set up reefs offshore. So from an educational perspective, there's a lot of these things in there. But this is students reacting to problems that they themselves, wouldn't want to have to be the caretakers for a world that other people have, you can say, muddied trash, effectively. So now, from a governance perspective, how should schools be treating this? Well, interestingly enough, one of my friend's daughters, she was one of the 3 organizers for the protests that were in Hong Kong. Those attracted about 1,000 students, mainly international school students, not a lot of public school students. And how it came about is students basically had their parents sign a absence form for them so they could take off on the Friday to join it. So it wasn't really a school-sanctioned event. Governance really didn't get involved. It was a missed opportunity because, when you think about what schools say in their websites and in their guiding statements, their vision and their mission is they're preparing these global citizens, people that are going to be able to tackle issues of tomorrow. And what they're missing is the opportunity to get them involved today. And they didn't get enough students out. I don't see, I talk to senior leadership in schools. I've talked to governors, and their minds just missed this one. They weren't even reading the news. They don't even probably know who Greta is. And when you think about what could have happened from a governance perspective, is they could have said, hey, you know what? This is something that's starting to build up. Let's use this as a learning opportunity, not as an opportunity for just venting. Let's see if we can help students channel this energy into something more productive, because the bipartisanship that's happening globally is because schools have not addressed it. They're waiting for kids to get out of school, go into the real world, and then take on these changes themselves. And effectively, that's why you have so many young legislators in the US that are basically very far left or very far right, because they were not taught how to get engaged and involved in the beginning. They know they can get involved, and when they do get involved, in their minds, they're thinking it's too late.
Yeah.
So I can see from a governance perspective, working with school management, and this is that relationship that's so important that we always talk about, saying, hey guys, what is the opportunity for us giving our kids a half a day off on this Friday when these protests are going to happen, letting them participate in the morning, but then bringing them back in the afternoon, perhaps with some special speakers, opportunities to workshop it throughout their classes, and just try to better understand what they experience. Not just about, hey, let's go out there and march, but hey, let's do this, create this in such a way that we're prepared to go out there with a message. Let's come back, reflect, and say, what are the follow-up steps? Because it's fine to go out there and voice this concern, but then you're left frustrated thinking, well, now what? Schools need to also help students understand the now what. And from a governance perspective, that's where the board has to empower management to say, look, guys, we know you have these tests coming up, but let's do this. Let's get with the staff and let's see, hey, if we take off on a Friday, are you guys willing to help students that might struggle with those exams coming up on a Saturday and spend that extra time and use this as an opportunity to really get involved in their learning? And I think a majority of teachers would say yes, because let's be honest, the majority of teacher professional development happens on weekends anyways. So they're pretty used to having their weekends taken away. But from a governance perspective, that's how I see the process working.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think it's about engaging the kids in the more public domain, the debate. And it's not just about climate change. There's a whole bunch of issues. And some of the media political discourse over where I am has been about, stay at school, get an education. You shouldn't be taking time off. You're at school to learn. And there's this disconnect. And again, politicians are governors in the same way. There's this disconnect between what kids are really passionate about and what is actually classified as a learning experience. So again, how can we marry these two things together? And again, engage kids in what they are passionate about. There's a huge proportion who are passionate about, the environment, sustainability, social justice. And there's no point waiting until they've graduated with all their exams and their pieces of paper. Let's get them involved now. But as you say, it has to come from the top, because otherwise, if it's grassroots led, it's going to create friction. So schools need to get involved in the conversation with also the rest of the community, parents, teachers, and everybody else. We talk about the school's community. How can they get involved and actually create something which is going to be longer lasting and, as you say, practical? I'm not saying that protests aren't practical. They are great for shaping social policy, if enough people do it. But yeah, taking it beyond that. And again, from a governance point of view, you're right, working with management, but also creating policies and structures to actually also respond to this when it happens. It's similar. We did a newscast on a couple of big issues last year. One was school shootings. And obviously, that we want to be quite sensitive to what's happened in New Zealand recently, and also in, I think it was Belgium today, overnight on a tram. There was another shooting, not in the school. And then there was also LGBTI and the issue of transgender children and use of bathrooms. You want to look back at different newscasts here, but these are all things that are coming up the boards are having to react to, whereby they should be thinking at a high level. There's all these environmental and social issues. We don't have to name them, but how are we going to be engaging with our community, our student community, when they feel strongly about these things and they want to do something about it? And that's the one on the board, is to look forward.
And the thing is, when we say react to, there's different types of reactions. There's the schools where this actually impacts. You can imagine, you know, say in Christchurch, where there's students not coming back to school. How are the schools going to address that? That is where governance really has to show their understanding of the community and embrace the community in the most unfortunate of circumstances. There's not a lot of schools that are going to be impacted at that level in terms of reaction, but there are going to be a greater number of schools that are impacted by the fact that students are going to become much more disconcerted within the way that their school communicates and deals with issues. There's a great amount of distrust as well within the community when you say, look, this is something we're promoting about global mindedness, but at the same time, we're not engaging in these activities that actually demonstrate our ability to get involved. And governance has to be worried about that. But if governance is not properly, and this is coming back to a board health check and evaluations of the school, if they're not properly evaluating what's going on within the school at that level, then how are they measuring their mission? In which case I would say that they're failing on that measure. And, you know, students are going to be the ones that are going to be most critical of them. And then they're going to be leaving the school probably feeling a bit bitter and angry. And then that anger carries on, and they develop it or find other channels outside of school that are much more extreme. And then they develop a more extremist type of approach. So it all starts in school, and governance has a great role of playing in that and helping them understand how to channel that in a much more productive way. So when you look at all the different types of things we've talked about over the last 6 months, that's just in 6 months. Have you had a conversation with your board and management yet about how you can take these problems that kids are facing and turn them into opportunities, so that you can go from saying we want to promote this global mindedness to actually helping students engage and understand what it looks like to be a part of that global community, and furthermore to affect change in it, even at minor levels, such as like engaging, like in the Hong Kong case. It was in the South China Morning Post, where students were, you know, requesting the Environmental Bureau to allow students to get more involved by having a student panel that worked with the environment panel. So the environmental panel can know what students were really, you know, upset about. I mean, for me, looking at this beach, that's what I'm really upset about. I can't bring my kids to swim here, and I'm sure students would be as well. But it was interesting because the Education Bureau, they came out and said this was a distraction to learning. So at what point, where governance, school management can have a fairly loud voice, but governors can have a much louder voice. This is where they can say to management, hey, focus on the opportunities for learning. We ourselves are going to get together with other boards, and then we are going to deliver a message to the Education Bureau that they need to get involved as well. And so the pressure can be applied upwards.
It just shows you another topic I'd love us to talk about in the future, and I'll just brush over it now, is student advisory committees or groups working directly with the governors of the school, you know, or the accreditors or whoever it happens to be, to actually create, you know, in the corporate board world, we talk about sort of millennial advisory boards, especially if your employee or customer base are really young, and that's increasingly so, obviously. And you want to make sure there's some sort of connection. The same works as a school. You know, how do you get the governors to work directly with students in terms of setting policies and guidelines? Yes, a lot of the governors will be parents themselves or teachers, but again, you need to be having that interaction at a very different level. It's very hard to listen to your children in the same way you would listen to a governance peer, even if it was like a student body. So I'd love to talk about the structure of and how kids can get involved in governance by working with the boards on particular issues like this. Because again, instead of dictating down policy and procedure that's impacting the students themselves, get them involved. And I think this is another perfect example and it's a perfect excuse to actually start a conversation. And that's what it's all about. It's all about, the communication skills.
And my last 2 cents on this is I just want to encourage everybody to go look for a editorialist, or his name is David Brooks for the New York Times, and he's got a great article called Change Makers. I recommend all governors to go out, Google search that article, find David Brooks, Change Makers, New York Times, and you'll kind of see what Paul and I are really talking about right now, and how governors can get more involved in ensuring that their school is turning out change makers. Especially if you're really concerned about getting students in the Stanford, Harvard, and Yale, and Oxford, and Cambridge, wherever you think like the big schools are, because at this time of year you're starting to ask that question, hey, where did our students get into school? Well, you know what? Maybe if you get them to stand out a little bit more by getting involved in these types of activities, and this is going to sound really, I don't want to sound like I'm being judgmental or judgy, I'm trying to think of another word for that, Paul, but change makers. If anything's going to make a student stand out on a college application, it's the fact that they took part in an activity like this, but not just raised a voice, but actually identified practical solutions that could be implemented. They were able to talk about it. And that shows a great deal of maturity, and is also going to further their progress and capacity to get into these schools that we as governors want them to get into. So that's my final piece. Sorry if it felt like I was up there on my soapbox, but
this is a great one for soapboxing, because obviously we're very passionate around this sort of stuff. Look, on that fantastic note, thank you to our outdoor assignment there, the beach, Michael. I hope when we turn the cameras off, you're going to start picking up the rubbish.
Yes.
And I'll join everybody next time for our next newscast next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.